Parshas Emor, which deals with primarily the beginning of the Parsha, laws specific to the Kohanim, and the end of the Parsha, which deals with the Moadim, the holidays, I'd like to take a look at the first pasuk in Parshas Emor, and indeed focus in on the name of the Parsha, which is very, very striking. Emor, to speak. When do we have a Parsha named after what seems to be such an ancillary word? Why not focus in on a much more major word, so to speak, a word that's much more poignant and much more, filled with much more meaning than Emor. Emor, Amirah, is to speak, seems to be such a random type of word. And I think what we can see from this first pasuk, that's going to be our goal for today, is that in this first pasuk is an instruction booklet on what chinuch banim, on what raising one's children is about, and it's really found in just 2 words. Let's take a look at the pasuk. Beginning the parasha, Hashem said to Moshe, say to the Kohanim, Emor el HaKohanim, the sons of Aaron, and we know the Kohanim are the sons of Aaron, and tell them, Va'amarta aleihem. So you have Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, you have Amira there. Emor el HaKohanim, you have Amira, say, second Amira there, and then Va'amarta aleihem, and tell them, 3rd time the word Amira is used in one sentence, and we then understand why Emor is the name of the parsha. Amira seems to be the major focus here. And what should you tell them? Each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person among his people, and it goes to list the laws of Tumas Meit. Here, as the article Stone Chumash notes in 2a, there is an apparent redundancy in the verse, since Moshe was told twice to say something to the Kohanim. In the plain meaning, Ibn Ezra comments that the first statement to them was the recitation of the previous chapters and their interpretations, because the Kohanim, as the scholars and teachers of Torah, would be responsible to safeguard it and preserve its integrity. And then Moshe went to the special commandments to the Kohanim. The Ramban maintains that a double expression indicates that commandment is being stressed due to its importance, or because it involves an activity that runs counter to the prevalent actions of the people. All of these Mefarshim are struggling with this double lashon of Emor, say to the Kohanim, Va'amarta aleihem, and say to them. What is the double lashon? Is it say to them what was said previously, Parshas Kedoshim, and now tell them this Parsha? Is it to reiterate over and over again to say to them? This is what we need to understand. So there's a lot of Torah on this. I'd like to focus in on Rashi, and use Rashi as our paradigm for this discussion. Rashi says in 2b, Emor va'amarta, the double language, lahazhir gedolim al ketanim, from the Gemara in Yevamos, in order that the adult Kohanim were cautioned regarding the children. And this is lahazhir, to warn the older Kohanim. Va'amarta, Emor al Kohanim, say to the Kohanim, say to the older ones, Va'amarta aleihem, and tell them to caution, to warn, lahazhir, the younger Kohanim, that the laws of Kahuna was something about Tamei Meit, that it's not only Tuma of older Kohanim, but it applies even at a younger age. This idea of Lazhir Gedolim al Ketanim, to warn the older for the younger, is really a paradigm, not only for the Kohanim, as we'll see, but really a paradigm in all aspects of life. I'd like to begin with the Tiferet Shimshon in source 4a, who points out a very important idea even before we enter into the world of parenting. And he says, Nitzavinu kan shagdolim yomru lektanim vayizhireim al shmirat hamitzvot. We see here that there's an obligation of the older people to warn the younger ones on keeping mitzvot. It's not even talking about chinuch here, how we have to train our children in the derech of Torah. Ela azhara v'lav daraisa, but rather it's teaching us something much more fundamental, or just as fundamental. Shelo lavi katan lavor al yisur v'arbein shalim b'zeh b'tei chisaron yudia. That an older person can't have a child transgress a mitzvah, and he says a lot of people are ignorant in this matter. And the examples that he gives are examples that we're all familiar with. Let's say we leave a light on Shabbos, and we say, oh, Gewalt, person's not going to be able to sleep in the room, whatever, electricity. So we say to a little kid, oh, here, why don't you just press this button, right? A 2-year-old, a 3-year-old. He says, that's wrong, because they're being over on a daraisa. Right, you're teaching them neged what the halacha is. You're not allowed to turn on lights or off lights on Shabbat. Right, if you find something in your pocket that you don't, and there's no eruv, and you don't want to put it down, so you'll say to a little child, why don't you carry it home for me? These are all areas where he says, doesn't matter if it's a father or somebody else who asks the child to do this. It is forbidden to do these things. So first and foremost, Lazhir Gdolim Ala Ketanim is teaching us how, as parents, we have to be careful what we feed our children. We have to be careful that even a young child who is, speaking Lashon Hara or stealing or doing anything that is wrong, that there is an obligation to stop them from doing these things. We can't say, well, they're only 3 years old, what difference does it make? No. There is this onus to make sure that the younger people are keeping the Torah. That's first and foremost, says Rav Pinkus, what we learn from our pasuk, Lazhir Gedolim Al Ketanim. The second thing that we learn, and that's what we'll focus in on today, is then we have the idea of chinuch, of which we just spoke about, not speaking Lashon Hara, not stealing, etc. This is an inyan of chinuch to keep them away from things that are asur in the Torah. What I'd like to try to suggest in Mirza Hashem today is that this phrase, Amor va'amarta, this double lashon, is really setting up for us, if we learn it correctly, a model of how chinuch takes place. And we'll see the way the different Mefarshim understand the different words in the pasuk that we're mamishting here, and that's the godless of learning. In one pasuk, which seems to be talking about how, Kohanim can't be, have tumas mate, impurity of coming in contact with the dead, it's really the fundamentals of chinuch. And I'd like to speak about really two aspects, what we call PC, the process of chinuch, and we'll see quite a number of levels. And then I'd like to take a look at two aspects. Obviously, it's not a mutually exclusive list of content. Now, clearly, even before we begin, an ingredient which I did not bring here, which is probably the most crucial ingredient of chinuch, so I'd like to begin with that, is no matter how much we do, and no matter how much we follow process and content, tefillah, davening to Hashem, the third partner, is of the utmost, it has to be utmost in our minds, and that's where our focus has to be. So this is not instead of, this is tefillah is understood. That's like number one. Aside from tefillah, what are some processes involved in chinuch banim? And then we'll take a look at two aspects of content. The first idea, and this is what we have to understand, Rav Hirsch notes that daber is different than amar. It says, Vayomer Hashem, and more, amarta. Daber, to speak, is to express an idea, whether there's anyone listening is immaterial. Telling, however, implies communication. And that's here when we're talking about amor conveys an idea to the mind of another, fully explaining and developing the idea. And that's why the people who wrote down the Gemara are called the Amoraim. The Amoraim, a maimer, is the idea to communicate, to explicate an idea. Dibur is like a monologue. Amira is communication. So that is the petach, that is the opening that we understand here, that when we're talking about the repetition of the idea of emor, that we really are talking about conveying to somebody else. It's not just a one-way street. The Amirah is trying to get across a lesson, an idea, and this is what is being focused in on our pasuk. The first aspect of process is, when do we begin chinuch? At what age does chinuch begin? And the answer is Chayavim, Rav Rice, source 6, Latchil Bekach, and the asterisk, Hechel Megil Sair. When do you begin educating a child? From a young age. The story is told of a family that went to a gadol and said, my child is a baby, when do I start doing mitzvos, being mechanech them? And the gadol said, every mitzvah you have an opportunity to do in front of the child, do it. Let the child see the mitzvahs. Let the child hear the mitzvahs. Let the child absorb the kedusha in the home. You give tzedakah, hold the baby in the hand, or do it in front of the baby in the stroller or wherever. And indeed, this is what the Gemara talks about. Gemara Sukkah, Tana Rabbanim, Katana Yodei L'Nanea Chayav Lulav. A child who knows how to shake lulav and esrog, you buy him a lulav. Litzatef, he knows how to put on tzitzis, give him tzitzis. Lishmor Tefillin, puts on tefillin. Yodei L'Daber, when he knows how to speak, his father teaches him Torah and Kriyat Shema. Klomar, Shechel Ma'agil Harach. Once the child is young enough, and depending on the age and different mitzvos, Chayvim L'Chancho L'Kach B'chol Amsayim. You have to teach him in any way possible. V'derech zu L'Kachim Niklatim B'Toda'a B'Tzura Sharashi. And in that way they become implanted in the child in a very fundamental way, right? To try later on to teach a child at 12, at 13 what these mitzvahs are, it's going to be too late already. It's never too late, but it's much harder. Let's put it that way. Here, when the soil is fresh and you can mamish plant it, so it becomes second nature for the child. That the child knows that wash netilat yadayim before washing for bread. Because if you start later, obviously many people do start later. It's not impossible. Baruch Hashem, there are many Balei Tshuva who are outstanding, shining examples. But it has to then be a conscious effort. When you train a child not to speak Lashon Hara from a younger age, it becomes natural. I don't speak about other people, period. That's where it's at. וכך תופס הילד את המצוות כחלק בלתי נפרד מעצמו, וכמשהו חיוני עבורו כאוויר לנשימה וכאוכל להשיב על נפשו. It becomes part and parcel of who the child is. The air they breathe, these are the mitzvahs we do. That's the type of chinuch that you want. And they say this about Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Ashrei Yoladato. What was so great about him? We know his mother used to bring his cradle into the Beis Medrash that he should be able to hear the words of Torah. And I know myself, I teach groups of women a Chumash year, and b'chasdei Hashem, many women, have children, had children, continue to have children, and I always encourage the women to, at least for the first few months when the child can sit and it's not a disruption, bring the child with you. Don't get a babysitter. And allow the child to hear words of Torah. You have no idea what it will do to this child, that just the atmosphere that they're in, even if it's an hour a day, right? Obviously, if you put on shiurim in the house, this is also helpful. But to be surrounded by the learning of Torah, I don't think there's anything that can beat that. That's, you want, that this is the air they breathe, right? This is what they're thinking about, is examples of Torah. And it's interesting, as Rav Masisel Salomon points out in source number 8, this is very famous, that when Avraham Avinu comes to save Lot, and it says, Vayarek et Chanichav, and that he mobilized his Chanichav. And who is that? So Rashi tells us those people influenced by his chinuch. What is the precise, which is Eliezer, meaning of the word chinuch? So there's a very famous Rashi. Rashi points out, he says, provides an interesting dictionary definition. It means the first introduction of a person or an item to the function that he or it will ultimately serve. That is why the word applies to the chinuch of people, and also to the Chanukah of the Mizbeach of the Beis HaMikdash. The word chinuch therefore means the establishment of a person on a solid footing to enable him to assume the role he is destined to assume. We have to make an assessment of the role toward which he is headed, and we have to prepare him for it. If what we have to do will take a long time, then we have to begin earlier. And we have to do those things that will have a lasting effect. So what is chinuch about? Chinuch is about an eye for the future. Chinuch is about being able to set up now what are the netunim, what are the aspects that need to be put into this child that they will grow into the type of person I envision them to be. He tells a very interesting story. You can have your own thoughts on this story. I'm just presenting it. Where once Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal was meeting with somebody, and they were sitting at the dining table, and one of Rav Yaakov's younger children came out and started dancing on the dining room table. Right? We're not talking about standing, we're talking about mamish dancing on the table. And Rav Yaakov continued talking to the guests, completely ignoring the child. With all due respect, middle of the 8b, the guest could not contain himself and turned to Rav Yaakov. He says, why is a child being allowed to dance on the table? Is this the way of mechanechim? What is chinuch, the asterisk in 8b, said Rav Yaakov. Why do we impose all these restrictions on a child? Child doesn't enjoy it. Sometimes we're actually harassing him. So why do we do it? Why not let the child run free? Do you know why? Because if you let him run free when he's young, he'll also run free when he's older. And then he'll end up doing things that he should not be doing. Do you agree? Source 10. Yes, of course, said the guest. Well, said Rabbi Yaakov, when the child grows up, I assure you he will not dance on tables. So what's the point of stopping him now? If you stop him from dancing on the table, it's not chinuch. It's only because you're bothered by the child dancing on the table. But it has nothing to do with chinuch. Very interesting approach to education, where because that idea of harassing the child is true. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do. And a lot of these things is because of our own comfort level, right? This is too loud and this is too messy and this is. But child's doing nothing wrong and may not necessarily do this. Again, you have to have that eye and vision for the future, right? Certain things the child has to be trained for now. Clean up your toys because in the future it'll be a mess if you don't clean up now. That's different than children doing things that are wild and crazy, where he would not envision doing this later. And that is a very beautiful piece, very famous piece in Cholos HaTalmidim, the Pishnetzer Rebbe, in source 9a, where he speaks about when we're teaching a child, we're teaching the nefesh, the neshama of the child. He says, every parent knows, continuing 9b, lo yisharu b'ktanutam. We all know intellectually that the child that we have in front of us is not going to remain a child forever, right? They don't stay at 10 years old. Sometimes we feel like 10 years old is a lifetime. I understand that. But they do grow up, and they do become adults. And he says, if our goal is to teach children to be good children, and we want them to always be, we're training them to be the best children they can be, he says, such a parent or malamed, chotehu neged Hashem v'amo, is a sinner. Tzarich ha-malamed v'av, tzrichim ladat, she'et b'nei Hashem v'gdolei Yisrael, leim lechanech v'legalot. You're teaching future leaders of the Jewish people. These children you're teaching are great neshamas that are in their, beginning stages. Gananhu began Hashem lo avdalu shamra. You're a gardener in the garden of Hashem. You see a child who's an obstinate child. Don't try to break his obstinacy. Be able to channel it and realize that that obstinacy is going to keep him in good stead. That'll always go to minyan. That'll always keep to his learning schedule because he's able to channel that midah in a proper way. And that is, I think, the first, when we're talking about process versus content. The first aspect of the process is to understand that we have to begin, A, at a young age, but B, the caveat with that is, at a young age with the eye, with the understanding that they don't stay that way. That when I'm training them now and here, it's the eye for the future. And that's the question that we often have to ask when we make decisions, We have to say to ourselves, this decision is not just the here and now decision, but what effect is it going to have? What path are we leading the child on? If we allow them to do X, X may not be so bad, but does X then lead to our, QS, whatever it is, which may not be the path that I want them to be on. So I have to pull them back here because I want to lead them as well as I can onto the garden that they are going to flourish in the best way possible. And that has to be the mindset that we have in educating our children. Start at a young age, but don't teach them to be the best children they can be. Help them be able, empower them, guide them, lechanech, to be able to establish themselves as future great people in Israel. That's idea number one. The second idea is when we speak to them, we have to be able to get over the material, and sometimes whatever we need to get over has to be said over and over again. Says the Medrash in 11, Hal Yonim Shein Yetzer Hara Matsui Bahem Amira Achat Haya Lahem Shene'amar B'Gzeiras Irin Piskamo Mamar Kadishin Shilsliya. For a malach to tell them something once is sufficient. They don't have the Yetzer Hara. Aval Tachtonim Sheish B'Hem Yetzer Hara Halavai Shtei Amiros Yamdu. But we who have a Yetzer Hara, Halavai, 2 times we will listen. Why does it say Amor V'Amarta, repetition? The second idea we learn from this pasuk, if the first, let's hear Gedolim Al Ktanim, is to teach the younger people, Amor V'Amarta. The second is Amor V'Amarta, say it over and over again. Because we have to understand that people don't just pick things up at one time. It's not enough just to say something once. You have to be able to give over the message, and sometimes you're going to oftentimes give it over in different situations, in different ways, until they really understand it. As the Beis Yisrael says in 12, Amor v'amarta lashon kaful ke'im di'ita hocheach tochiach afilu mea pamim. Just like rebuke, hocheach tochiach is repeated even 100 times. Because v'zeu haremes af shalom mekabel mimenu pam rishon yamar lo oda pam. You say it again. Ki ein lecha adam she'ein lo shah. You don't have somebody where it will click at a certain moment. Af shelo shama b'pam rishon yishma b'pam hasheni. Maybe he won't get it the first time, but he'll get it the second time. The very famous Kutzker Vort. And we say in the Shema that we should put these words, right, Vayud Rimeila Al Vavcha, on your heart. So ask the Kutzker Rebbe, shouldn't it be in your heart? Why are we putting it on our heart? Don't we want the words to be in our heart? So says the Kutzker Rebbe, very often our hearts are closed. We're not ready to hear what we have to hear. So put it on your heart. Even if your heart is closed, keep it on your heart. Why? Because one day when your heart will open, when something will happen that will inspire you, then all that you've put into your heart, on your heart, will suddenly enter into your heart. It's all going to penetrate, it's all going to go in. And that's the idea of, teaching a child. Sometimes you feel like, teaching. I've had this experience, sometimes I feel like I'm talking to the wall. And you feel like, whatever you're saying isn't going into it, right? There's deaf ears all around you. But you don't know that maybe this one time what you're saying is going to have, the person is ready to listen and it's going to transform their lives because they've, no one has it. There's no one without their time. And when that time comes, boom, it all comes in. However, he says, and this is very important, and we all know this as parents, Ein hakavana l'dlikom shel dvarim shekvar nemru v'krova hi lafsed yoter masher l'reviach. Don't keep on repeating yourself over and over again, right? To be a machine, Haven't I told you 1,000 times? I'm going to tell you another 1,000 times. You're right. If you're going to say it 1,000 times in the same way that you said it the last 1,000 times, you will say it another 1,000 times and not be successful. Each time you say it has to be a little bit different, with a little bit different story, with a little bit of a different tone of voice, in a little bit of a different way. And that is how we have to get over. And he says clearly in the dot in 13, there is no place for the yeyush, for despair. And you have to recognize it's about process and it's about the right timing and it's about timing is everything, where now the person is ready to hear it. And he brings that Maisa of Yaakov Avinu, who when he comes to Haran, he sees that the shepherds are just standing around and he says, Hashkuat soda l'chura'u, feed the sheep and go shepherd. And they said, we can't, there's a big rock on the well and we can't take it off. So Yaakov Avinu knows there's a big rock on the well. He's not telling him a chiddush here. So explains it Sfas Emes. But Yaakov Avinu is saying to them, why don't you at least try? Why are you sitting here, with your hands folded, giving up? At least try to take the rock off the well. Maybe you'll be successful. Maybe indeed you'll be able to take the rock off the well. And obviously the rock on the well is an imagery for us in terms of our Avodas Hashem, in terms of the Yetzer Hara that's on us, that you're right, maybe we're not able to take it off right away. Maybe it takes time. And in fact, the Imrei Emes said, had they tried that one time, they would have been successful. You can't give up in life. You can't give up on any child. You can't give up on yourselves. And obviously here, my friends, when we're talking about chinuch, a person may be listening and saying, Either I'm not yet married, I don't have children, or I've already raised my children, or whatever story it is. And you'll say, well, this year is so totally not for me. Whoa, wrong. We all have to recognize that education begins with self. And education, although I'm using the model of children, is obviously everyone we come in contact with is an educational experience. And how we deal with people is an educational experience. How many times we have at work and we try to communicate something to the person we're working with and they just don't get it. And they just don't get it. And you wonder to yourself, like, they're an intelligent person. What's wrong? And people are blocked and people have different issues. And you can't give up and you have to find different ways to do it. Which leads us to process number 3. If process number 1 is start at a young age with a vision for the future, part of process number 2 is emor v'amarta, to be able to say it over and over again. Process number 3 is the language amira itself. Amira, as we spoke about, is speaking softly. This is the idea that's brought down in the Beis Yisrael, in the asterisks in 5. V'ktiv emor lashon raka, la'arod haderech l'daber benachat mikodem, la'arod haseder ech la'achnis yirat shamayim b'leiv chaveiro, mikodem benachat. How do you speak to somebody, and this could be a child, to a friend, to a spouse, to anybody? You start off benachat. Right? Divrei chachamim benachat nishmayim. The words of the wise are said benachat. So we start at a young age, we repeat ourselves over and over, but we have to realize that our best way of being successful in teaching is to teach benachat, to teach with softly. And it's interesting, there's a pasuk in Mishlei which says, Be'orech apayim yifutach katzin, v'lashon raka tishaber garem. You want to break something hard, it's through a lashon raka. And here there's a beautiful word of the Meiri. The Meiri says the tongue has no bones, but it has the ability to break bones. What does that mean? The tongue can break through anybody, but you have to know how to use the tongue well. And you can melt somebody's heart by being able to speak to them in a way that's going to allow them to be open. And that's the Talmud Das. Rav Sternbach says, Lefi shelo harei amirah l'dolim k'harei amirah l'tanim. V'tzarich she'emar l'chol echad 16 b'lshono ra'oi lo k'fi tchunat nafsho sheyu dvarim mitkablim al libo. Why does it say amirah twice? Because the way you speak to older people is not the way you speak to younger people. And you have to know how to tailor-make every type of amira to this person. As the Or Daniel speaks about, la'olam tehei small docha in the middle of 17 v'yamin mekarevet. The Gemara tells us that we should always have our right hand, our left hand pushing away and our right hand bringing close. Why the left hand pushing away? That's the weaker hand. This is the idea that our mindset, our focus has to be love. Our focus has to be with kind words. Reshit aleinu lizkor in the asterisk. Ki l'chol yeled, l'chol yalda nitiyot v'shifot shanot. That every child has different focuses in life. Lada lakiram lichashay bekach. You have to be able to be aware of this and know how to speak to every person where they're at. We all know that when a teacher screams, when a parent screams, what do the students do? Tune out. But when you speak softly, when you're being impassioned, and you show that you really care, the right hand embracing, then you'll have a much greater effect. So, first 3 P's so far is being able to start young with a vision. 2, being able to speak over and over again as many times as necessary, in different ways. And the third aspect of process that we learn from our pasuk is amira. Amira's lashon raka, not like vaydaber, which is lashon kashet. Right? Kol tomar leveis Yaakov and tagay levnei Yisrael. Kol tomar, you speak to the women, but lashon raka, in a soft way. How do you teach? Amor, that's the name of the parsha. You convey to others in a way that is going to be beautiful, soft, inviting, and not, with this harshness. The fourth component of process, which is so crucial, is role modeling. We know, Merosharim again in Source 18, that the only way really to be able to get through to a child, obviously speaking and is important, but it's through role modeling. And that's why Gadol Shimusha Shel Torah Yoter Milimuda, the being Mishamesh Talmid Chacham, watching Torah in action, is even greater to a certain degree than learning Torah. Because Torah is about Lama Chinuch HaYehudi, the asterisk in 18 says Rav writes, Mevusas Bikaro Lo Tosefet Yediot. Yiddishkeit learning is not about knowing more knowledge, as much as Ela Chinuch Ma'asi Laknayat Orchot Chaim. It's about being able to take that knowledge and to make you a person who's going to be a greater person. And you really learn more from the way a teacher acts and what they say. And we know this to be true, and studies have been done, that children learn more from watching role models and watching parents and teachers interact than they do in the classroom, right? And I've seen this over and over again in the educational field. In my own life, I've seen it, that students watch you like a hawk. I feel like every time I walk into class or they come home to my house for Shabbos, like under a microscope. It's a very intense feeling. And obviously nobody's perfect. But if you ask them at the end of the year, well, what did you learn, right? When they write you these letters at the end of the year saying thank you. So of course they say thank you for what you've taught in class. But over and over again, you find in these letters one theme. I've learned the most from watching you interact with your children. I've learned from watching you interact with other students. I've learned from watching. It's the watching which is is really where the learning comes through, because this is where push comes to shove. When you're in the field, now what do? It's very nice in the theoretics, but when you're under that gun and you're feeling all this tension, what are you able then to act? That's where they're going to learn. And in fact, that's why some of the Sfarim say that we really don't have midos in the Chumash. We don't have, the Orchos Sadikim isn't found in the Chumash. Why? Because midos is very much based on shimush. There's certain times where it is appropriate to get angry. There's certain times it's not. There's certain times that you have gaiva de kedusha. Certain times humility. And this is something that has to be learned from watching a great person. And that's why he says, quoting here the Chazon Ish in Emunah B'Tachon in 19, Mina mafsidim hayoteri kariyim hayot melamed l'rabim bilti shalei b'midotav. One of the greatest tragedies or the greatest challenges that we have in losing students is having a teacher who's not shalem in his midos, a mechanech who's not whole. Not only will he not treat his students properly, but he's not going to be able to get across the message that needs to be gotten across, because this is where it's at. The students are watching you. It's very nice to say, and you hear this over and over again, right? Teacher says, don't embarrass somebody, and then what happens? Then they go embarrass this kid in class. All the messages that you've taught are lost. 20. Klalo shel davar. You know what chinuch is about? It's about a mechanech is like a cup who's overflowing with goodness, with midos, and it just is makrin. It just has an effect on all those around you. So you'll say, well, we should all, not be in teaching, which is what I feel like more often than not. Like, I'm not there to be under a microscope and come out, whole, because we're human and we make mistakes more than we'd like to admit. So he says, if you are sho'ef l'shleimut, if at least you show a desire for shleimus, harei zeh makrin al chanich alfei monim yoter masher dvarim alidim kechol shehu. When a child sees that you're trying, you're working on yourself, when your own children see that you're taking on something, that you're working on this midah, that they see you're learning about something, that you're becoming more careful, they see you learning Hilchos Shabbos and being more careful about Hilchos Shabbos, they're seeing you working on a midah about getting angry and you're trying to get angry less, that desire, to a certain extent, is already there. It's about process, but the student sees, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this, it was out of character. Those apologies go a long way. And that's the idea that Ksav Sofer explains on Chosech Shivto, continuing 21, the asterisk Sonebeno, one who withholds the rods, spoils the child. Which means if you withhold the rod from yourself, which means you don't work on yourself, that's how you're going to spoil a child. You have to become a model of somebody who's going to have their own self-restraint. When you have your self-restraint, you're able to affect your children. And keep in mind, as we mentioned in 21, in the asterisk, in the circle, everyone has. More so, less so, an influence on the people around them. Of course, parents and teachers more so. But everyone has. People watch them. People say, wow, if under these circumstances they're able to, hold their cool, how much more so we can. And in all of these situations, this is what we have to understand, is that people are watching us, and that people are looking at us whether we realize it or not, and that we have an effect that we have on other people. And when we have this effect on others, then, whether we realize it or we don't realize it, people are watching us, people are watching how we respond. And it affects them, and they say, wow, do you see how they kept their cool under the situation? They didn't get excited? I also could do that. And it's a model, and it's a lesson. And that's how he explains so beautifully. The Svarim say, Lashir Gedoli Malkatanim. Lashir, which literally means to warn, is Melashon Zohar. That the great people have to be Lahashir. They have to light. They have to create an energy, a Zohar, an energy of light on the younger people. That's what Chinuch is all about. And that is why, as Rabbi Fram points out from the Beis Av, this is why we have this pasuk, that this is the place we learn chinuch from. We all know how to teach children to do mitzvahs. When a boy is young, we buy a pair of scissors. When he gets a little older, we learn Torah with him. We teach our daughters to make blessings, to pray, to appreciate Shabbos. This is all relatively simple. We can condition our children to do the acts, but how can we inspire them? How can we instill in them a true Yirah Shamayim, a true awe of living in the presence of the Almighty, so they should love to do mitzvahs and find things abhorrent? The only way it can be accomplished is if the children see Yirah Shamayim in the parent. Teach them by example. Children must see their parents recoil from food whose kosher status is questionable. They must see their parents effuse, continues Rabbi Frand, with the joy of a mitzvah. They must see their parents trembling in the awe of the Almighty. Only then will Yirah Shamayim become real to them. They too will be caught up in the mood and the atmosphere of the home, and they too will become accustomed to living in the presence of the Almighty. Now we can understand the seemingly redundant words of the Torah. First Hashem told Moshe to speak to the Kohanim and inform them of the mitzvah. Then he told Moshe to say it to them again, to impress on them that it would not be enough simply to obey and fulfill. A higher level of performance was required of them, a type of performance that would carry forward to the next generation when the children see the diligence, inspiration, and awe with which the adults embrace the mitzvah. And that is why the Drash Moshe, and Moshe Feinstein points out, the first Amira is Etzem Ha'isur V'Achiyut. The Sheni Sheyeh Chaviv. One Amira is what you do right and wrong. And the second Amira is that the mitzvahs have to be Chavivim. They have to be special to you to be able to give it over to your children. Rabbi Kelman, in the end of his book, To Kindle a Soul, notes the following, 26. On the first night of Elul many years ago, an elderly stage taught his Jerusalem audience. This is the Torah approach to education. Only one who has learned to bring forth his own potential can succeed in helping other children and students draw forth their latent greatness. Now it seems this was the most fundamental lesson I learned throughout my investigation. Great parenting and teaching require great parents and teachers. People are themselves truly great human beings. No amount of pedagogic technique or psychological insight will substitute. One must not only struggle to teach others, one must struggle to educate himself. Only when we pursue nobility is there hope for uplifting our children and students too. And he brings down here a very interesting Rambam that says, if a child is capable of holding his parent's hand, then his parents must take him to the Temple Mount, and there the parent presents himself, listen to the words of the Rambam, in his child. Maimonides did not write that parent presents himself with his child. He says that a parent appears in his child. How? Young children inherit their parents' spiritual achievements and failings. My children's trek begins where my journey ends, and his starting point thus reveals what aspects of my greatness I've actualized. He mirrors my kindness, patience, honesty, and self-discipline, or my lack thereof, usually in exaggerated proportion. He may advance further regrets when he grows older, but now my young child is faithful testimony about who I truly am. In the facades we put on for others, we demonstrate our potential. Through our children, we reveal our reality. We cannot give to others what we ourselves fail to possess. We must ignite our own growth process before we can pass the torch to others. Child raising thus becomes a task that begins long before children arrive, and is conducted as much in their absence as in their presence. It is the all-consuming process of firing up our own soul and then passing that flame to our children. On this idea, I'd like to just share a very beautiful insight that Rabbi Spiro brings in that book, Touched by Their Faith. What does it mean to pass on this torch to one's children? He tells two stories back to back, two vignettes. The first is a story in 1914 where the Steipler was a bacher. He was learning in yeshiva, and he had gone home, where he'd come occasion to visit another city. And there he met a father of one of the other Talmidim studying in his yeshiva, one of the other students. And the father said to him, "Are you going back to yeshiva?" He said, "Yes." He says, "Wow, let me draft a letter," because then, 1914, the postal system wasn't like it's today. And no email in those times. It's hard to tell our children there was no email, but we understand that. And he drafted a letter, and he said to the Steipler, "It's really important. Please give this to my son." And as fate would have it, World War I began to break out, and Steipler was not able to go back to yeshiva. And, the roads were closed, and one thing after the other, and then the war broke out, but he knew that this letter was very important. The father said, "This letter is very important, please give this to my son." So he realized it was very important. He carried it with him wherever he went. He did not let go of that letter, because he didn't want to lose it, because he knew, how this father wanted to send this to his son. We're now talking about 8 years have passed. And I believe it was 8 years. And the father had since died, this father. The son had married and had a child who was named for the father. And finally, Rav Yaakov was able to find this man and told him that he had a letter. Now this letter takes on so much more significance. His father had died. Rav Yaakov Israel, the Steipler, said, "I'm sending this with a shaliach. I'm going to send you this letter tomorrow." And this boy could not sleep all night. Finally, to get a letter from his father, felt like, it was like a letter from Gan Eden. And they went out and they bought like a fancy ornate frame. And they made like a little party, like here they were going to finally get a letter from the father. This is like, at this point, it was like his last will and testament. He opens the letter and he recognizes his father's handwriting, and he becomes so overwhelmed. He reads the letter and then he begins to cry. So his brother, who's standing there, it's like this was a family occasion, said, "Tell me, what is it? What is it?" And he couldn't answer. So, unable to control himself, the brother grabbed the letter and began to read it. Here was the letter. "My dear son, how are you? How is your learning? Please do me a favor. When you come home from yeshiva, don't forget, make sure to bring us the sardines. Love, your father." That was his last will and testament. Don't forget, make sure to bring us the sardines. There's a second letter that Rav Yitzchak Isaac shared, that before becoming Rosh Yeshiva in Slobodka, he's Rosh Yeshiva elsewhere. And often the Bachrim, when they would receive a letter from their father, they would share it with him. So this was a letter that one of the boys got, that he shared with his Rosh Yeshiva, with Rav Yitzchak Isaac Sher. "Dear son, how are you? How are you learning? Please remember that whenever you make a decision, stop for a moment and think, what would I decide if this were the last day of my life?" And that letter was from the elder of Slobodka, Rav Nosson Tzvi, to his son, Rav Eliezer Yehuda, known as later Yudel, who was the Rosh Yeshiva Semirim Europe and later in Yerushalayim. And as Rabbi Spiro notes, 2 letters. In one, the father entrusts his son with the legacy of delivering sardines. And in another, the father gives his son the tools with which to make decisions for the rest of his life. As parents, we must ensure that our children know what is valuable and important. Let us not allow our children to think that a can of sardines or sushi is the most important thing in the world. This, my friends, is what it's about, being a role model. This is, my friends, what it's about in giving over a legacy to our children. This is what it's about, being able to actualize what we are trying to have our children become. So, my friends, what we have seen here is the beginning, is process. This pasuk, in really 2 words, and more of Amarta, are teaching us what, not only the Kohanim, Lasir Gedolim al Katanim, for the Kohanim, it's for all of us. This is education. How do we, make sure the elders teach the younger? First, Katanim, start at a young age, with a vision of Gedolim, with a vision of what they'll be like in the future. Second, it's the Amor and Amarta. Repeat it over and over again. Don't give up. Even if a child has difficulty understanding, there are late bloomers in life, different situations open them up. Alavavcha, the Katzgavur, when they're ready, it's all going to go in. Can't give up. Keep on trying to move the stone off the well in different ways. 3, Amira, Raka, speak softly. Make sure that the right is embracing more than the left is pushing away, that there's love there, that there's softness there, that softness is able to break much more than harshness. And finally, in process, make sure that we are the role models that we need to be. In all areas of our lives, people are watching us at all times. You can be in the bank, you can be in the doctor's office, it doesn't matter. People are watching you at all times. Are you the role model you want to be? Are you acting in the way that you envision yourself to be? And this is our challenge, to be able to become, or at least aspire to become, as great as we can be, that we're working on ourselves, that we're in process, we're on the path, and in that way we are giving over that message to our children. When we tell our children, when we don't want to speak to somebody with caller ID, tell them I'm not home, you've just, destroyed your chinuch about lying, about honesty, about truth. You did it right then and there. You have to be the type of role model that you want they're picking up from where you've left off, so to speak. Let's speak about 2 aspects of content with the time that we have. When you teach your children, what to focus in on in teaching them. What are fundamental aspects? One is, Rabbi Roberts brings down through the prism of Torah, it begins by saying, speak to the priests who are the descendants of Aaron. This means remind them of their noble extraction from Aaron the high priest. Let them realize that if they do not heed the regulations and contaminate themselves, they're not only defiling their own bodies, but also spoiling the great name of their ancestor by their waywardness. Likewise, every Jew originates from noble forebearers, extending back to the patriarchs. Whatever he does, therefore, reflects on them for better or worse, and obliged him to behave in a way that will ring to their credit and not to their shame. The Torah continues, tell them something. Rashi explains there as meaning, warn the senior concerning their children. If the grown-up priests are very careful with the relevant laws, the juniors will follow suit. It's an also responsibility, but offspring automatically copy what they see and hear, become the product of their family environment. Finally, the verse concludes, do not defile yourself among your people. This injunction has halachic connotation specific to priests. But there's also a wider lesson to be learned from these words. Every single Kohen must realize that he does not live in a vacuum. He's part of a tribe, in particular when he's at work in the temple service. His associates observe him and learn from his conduct. Any laxity is infectious, and by defiling himself, he will corrupt other people around him. The ripple effect is frightening. The same warning is directed to any Jew. No one lives on a desert island. We are all surrounded by fellow Jews from morning to night, and we teach by example whether we like it or not. If we behave correctly in speech and deed, our merits will proliferate. If we do not, we'll be held accountable for those that we mislead, and it's a chilling thought. What should you tell the person? First and foremost, content is realize that what we do has implications, and recognize that who you are is one of someone being special. And this is how Rav Hirsch describes this. The asterisk of 30. Thus, Amor Lakoni B'nei Aaron expresses an independent idea. V'amarta is one thing, but what do you tell them? Tell them that they are B'nei Aaron. Explain to them that their kahuna derives from their being from Aaron. Be able to explain to them that they are great. And this is something that we need to understand by each and every one of us as well. That we need to be able to see our greatness. That we are B'nai Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And this is something that we must convey to our children. Jewish pride. And we have to be able to see how amazing and wonderful we are. And that is why Rabbi Fran brings down, why here? Why is the Inyanim of Chinuch that we're speaking about found in this section of the Kohanim? If the Torah was going to choose 32, one place in which to command us to educate our children to follow the mitzvos and rely on us to extrapolate the obligation to all the mitzvos, wouldn't it be more appropriate to place this teaching in a less obscure place? We could easily find mitzvos that apply to a broader percentage of the Jewish people without going too far. Talk about the Yamim Tovim in this week's parsha. Why choose a mitzvah that applies to less than 10% of Klal Yisrael to teach us the all-encompassing mitzvah of Chinuch? So it quotes Rosh Yeshiva Ner Yisrael, Rav Yaakov Weinberg Zatzal, who says the following: so much of parenting is dependent on our ability in the Aaron 32 to withstand that famous personality, Mr. Everyone Else, quote unquote. Our children want to take part in activities that we feel are not appropriate for a Jew. When we disallow that activity, we face a barrage of complaining and whining. But everyone else is going. It's not fair. What's wrong with it? Who has to deal with these complaints more than anyone else? Is the B'nai Aharon. Because they have greater restraints than everyone else. If Aaron's father is wise, right, Aaron being a little, Kohen child, he will sit down and tell him, do you know how special you are? You can serve in the Beis HaMikdash. And if he then spends time discussing with him the privileged status, then he won't be so jealous of his friend. The same applies to every one of us. If we simply say, sorry, but you cannot go, we'll find ourselves fighting tooth and nail with our children. But if we take the time to discuss our special role in the world to our children, to tell them that our holy eyes cannot see things that others see, our hearts filled with Kedusha that can be contaminated by food that others are allowed to eat, that our holy neshamas can't be tarnished by listening to music that others listen to, and what a privilege it is to be such a holy nation, we may get a respite from our difficult enemy, Mr. Everyone Else. And this is the Mishchat Shemen. Rav Kaufman echoes this, and he says, in order to be successful in chinuch, and to teach children what we're here for in this world, speak to them in a clear, soft way, and tell them how special it is to be part of Klal Yisrael, and how inappropriate it is for them to act in this way. And that's the way the Al Shech HaKadosh explains the pasuk in Mishlei Terchet. Al tochech leitz pen yisaecha. Don't rebuke a lazy person, he may hate you. Hochech lechacham v'yavecha. Rebuke instead a wise person, he'll love you. Hold on a second. If he's wise, then why does he need to be rebuked? He knows what he's doing. He says, says the Al Shech HaKadosh is telling you how to deal with people. If you tell people you're a late, you're a nobody, it's not going to be successful. If you tell them, Amor lo chacham atav ein matim leish hashar, you're a chacham, it's not appropriate for you to be acting this way, then Yaveka, then he'll listen to you and he'll accept your musar. Why is chinuch found here? Because chinuch is not only about, as we spoke about, being able to set down the foundations and to be a good role model. Chinuch is to be able to give over to our children how special they are. And in order for them to imbibe this in and of themselves, to be able to realize their greatness. And it's specifically by the Kohanim that this is a greater opportunity, as well as the Ol Moshe says a greater challenge, where he notes that there are really two fields that educate a child, a parent and society. And we know that, you can have the best educators and the best parents, and the kids have friends that take them in a different direction. It's really a big challenge. By the Kohanim, it's even a greater challenge. Why? Because if your kids are hanging out with people that are inappropriate, you can say this is inappropriate. But if everyone, let's say, is going to a baseball game, play softball in an empty field, and they have to pass through a graveyard, so the other boys are just going. But your little boy can't go that way because he can't pass the base kvaros. That's much harder for him. And because there are much more restrictions that he has to deal with than other children have to deal with, and more of Amarta, here's where the chinuch is focused. Tell him how great he is. Don't just restrict him. You can't go here, you can't do that, you can't do this. The mitzvah of chinuch is found here, content. In order to teach us the way to be able to give over to our children is you're great. You're amazing. You are part of, for the Kohanim, a exclusive tribe. That kids who are Kohanim or Levim should sign their name on the test, right? Yisrael Meir HaKohen, right? They should write that they're a Kohen, they're a Levi. They should be proud of the Kuna and Levi. I tell it to my students, you marry a Kohen or a Levi, make sure that it's on the wedding invitation, that this is something you should carry with pride. And it's not only the Kohanim and Levim, we should all carry who we are with pride. That we are Ben Yisrael, we're Bas Yisrael. We don't act this way. We don't do these things. So that's what we learn from our pasuk in terms of content, that, right, of Bnei Aaron. The next phrase, that be careful, realize your status. That was what was being told over, says refers to the Kohanim. What should you tell them? 2 words. You're Bnei Aaron. And that's the greatest lesson of chinuch. Whether you're Bnei Aaron, you're Kohanim, or you're Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and you're Benos Yisrael, or Ben Yisrael, that is the greatest chinuch you can tell them. That's content. That always makes them feel like, wow, I have to live up to this greatness. The second and final aspect of content is a very interesting Noam Elimelech, who looks at our Rashi from a Derech Drush. And he says, Lazhir Gdolim means, in the asterisks in 36, to warn the great people, ala ktanim. What should you teach great people as well as everybody? Be careful of the small details. Some people say, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's just so trivial, so small. The Navi says, Kimi baz liyom katnut. Lo'olam ein l'zazel b'katnut. Never make fun of anything that's small, because it's from the small things, it's from those small details, heim habonim et hadam hagadol, that build the great person. If you want to build a person, how is it important to build a person? Be careful of the small things. You may think, oh, what's the big deal? So they're doing this. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, but we all know that a little bit moving in one direction over time, the chasm is very great, and the split is very great. And what started off as a small hair has turned into. And the allowance of doing one thing has now, you give them a finger, they take more than a hand, they take a whole body. Recognize that the small details, recognize in content that when you're training a child, don't only look for the major things, make sure they're in order. The small parts of the body too. You have lo aleinu, one artery, one, that's stopped up, it has health problems. You say it's one artery, it's one cell. It's not just one, it affects the entire body. And that's a famous Maaseh. Well, this will conclude, it will summarize the Mirz Hashem of the Gra, who once met somebody who took a drink without saying a shahako. And the Gra said to him, you didn't say a bracha. And the person says, please, like rolling their eyes. You can almost imagine this. Didn't say a bracha? I've done so much worse than not saying a bracha. Like eating on Yom Kippur, on Shabbos, on, treif. I'm not holding anywhere. And you're worried about this one bracha? And says the Gra, Yadoa Teda 37 Mishkat Shemen begins. Shebishamayim imal eina shikha mitzuya klal. No, in heaven there is no forgetting, and you can't hide any action that you do. Vafilo maseh pa'ut biyoter. Even the smallest thing that shahakol, and you're going to have to give a din v'cheshbon on every prat, on every aspect of your life. And don't think that you can escape it. And the Gra spoke to him in a very soft, building type of way, how you can change and you can be more careful. And ultimately this person became a full Baal Tshuva. We can't negate the importance of something small. Oh, who really cares? What's the big deal? Everything is a big deal. When you're building a building, you don't, forget on any part of the building. You don't say, well, this isn't so straight, what's the big deal? Your whole building may collapse, right? Oh, this isn't so strong, who really cares? No, I care. I got to live in this building. I want to live, in a more or less sturdy place. Details are very important, and be able to have that eye for the future, that we're building a building, and the small parts of the building are equally important as the major ones. So my friends, what we try to see today, transmitting the tradition, one pasuk. This is the source for chinuch, and it's fascinating how just these two words, and hence we understand the parsha being called Emor, is teaching us so much about what chinuch is about. Start with a young age, lasir gedolim al katanim, but with that vision of the future. 2, being able to say it over and over again. 3, being able, Amira B'Lashon Raka. 4, being lasir, being that Zohar, being that transmitting that light to your children. What is the last will and testament that you want to give to your child? What is it that you want to give over to them? The importance of sardines, or the importance of making decisions in life? In terms of content, we've done the process. Recognize that a child has to see the greatness of being Jewish, feeling that Jewish pride. Not like it's a burden, but it's something special. It's something that is like, wow, and I want to live up to that imagery. And 2, being able to be very careful in terms of the content of the small details that a child is involved with in life. Not like a hawk over their head in every single thing they do, but realize that what they're doing and what they're saying, and just maybe a small lie here at age 4, a little lashon hara, but where the ramifications of that are, being able to be aware of that. Lasir gedolim, to warn the great people, alaktanim, on the small details of life, because it's the small things in life that are going to build great people and great experiences in life, to be able to transmit that tradition to the next generation as well.